On est presque prêt à commencer. Nous sommes le Subcommittee des droits internationaux de la personne du Comité permanent des affaires étrangères et du développement international. Aujourd'hui, le 25 octobre 2012, est notre séance numéro 53. We are televised today. Remember, your mother will probably be watching it. And because my mother is watching it, I just want to say happy birthday to my sister. I won't tell you how old she's turning today because she's reached the age where on your birthday you wear sackcloth and ashes, but nevertheless, Jackie, happy birthday. We have with us today Robert King, the United States Ambassador and Special Envoy for North Korean Human Rights. He comes and testifies to us pursuant to our ongoing study of the human rights situation in North Korea, which has occupied this committee on and off now for almost 2 years. And I'll just, Mr. King will be beginning, Ambassador King will be beginning, giving a presentation. Based on the length of this presentation, how much time we have left, that will determine how long each set of questions is today. And one last thing, once we've dealt with this, I do have an item of business dealing with the potential witness from the Congress of the Philippines, which we'll deal with at the end. But I'll try and speak to each of you separately, just to whisper in your ear about it, to get a sense of the committee prior to turning that so we can deal with it as quickly as possible. All of that being said, Ambassador King, we're glad to have you here. Please feel free to begin.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I spent many years with the United States Congress, and I appreciate the legislative branch. Let me make a few comments about North Korea and the North Korean human rights situation, and try to save most of the time for questions, because I'm sure you have a number of issues you would like to raise. The human rights situation in North Korea is deplorable. The State Department produces a report annually examining the human rights situation of countries around the world, and the report for 2011, the most recent report, talks about extrajudicial killings, disappearances, arbitrary detention, arrests of political prisoners, torture. The judiciary is not independent, does not provide fair trials or due process. The North Korean government continues to control almost all aspects of citizens' lives, denying freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and association. Reports continue that the government severely restricts freedom of movement and subjects its citizens to forced labor. We've also had reports that the government is responsible for disappearances, and there's been very little progress on the investigation into cases of suspected abductions of Japanese nationals by the North Korean government. I want to mention two specific issues regarding North Korea human rights that are noteworthy. The first is with regard to political prisons in North Korea. There are a number of books and reports and conferences that have been held recently dealing with the issue of North Korean political prisons. These reports describe very harsh, life-threatening conditions in prison camps and the detention system in North Korea. This year, the prominent American journalist Blaine Harden published Escape from Camp 14. This is based on interviews with Shin Dong-hyuk. He's the only prison camp inmate who's been known to have escaped from this most secure of North Korean prison camps. Shin Dong-hyuk was born in the prison camp. His father was in a prison camp because his father's brother had gone to South Korea. His mother was in the prison camp not because of anything she had done, but because, again, one of the members of her family had been guilty of committing some crime. Shin Dong-hyuk the parents were allowed to marry in the camp, and Shin Dong-hyuk was the result of that camp, of that marriage. One of the things that the book describes in great detail, the brutal conditions in those prison camps. One incident, Shin Dong-hyuk was a 14-year-old boy. He was in the prison camp not because of anything he had done, but because his parents were there. He was told that there was no hope that he would ever be released from the prison camp. As a young teenager, he was asked to carry a very heavy piece of equipment up a flight of stairs. It was too heavy for him. He dropped it. He damaged the equipment. His immediate punishment was that his middle finger was severed at the second knuckle. This young man also was taught that the worst thing that a prison camp inmate can do is to leave the camp, to try to escape, and that every person in the camp has a responsibility, if they find somebody who is going to escape, to report it to the guards. Shin Dong-hyuk went to see his mother. They didn't live together. He was still a teenager. He went to visit his mother and found out that his mother and brother were intending to escape from the camp. He went back and concluded that he had to report it because this is what he was told he had to do. He reported it. He was not trusted. They took him and tortured him. He was Hooks were put through him. He was held over hot charcoal. After a week or so of punishment, they came to the conclusion that he was probably telling the truth. And then he was taken out to a large field where all of the inmates in the camp were gathered together. And there, in front of the entire camp population, his brother was executed by a firing squad and his mother was hung. This account is a very dramatic account of what conditions are like in North Korean prison camps. And I think the publication of this book and the publication of other reports, the Committee on Human Rights in North Korea has published a book on the hidden gulag, which has satellite photographs of various locations that have been identified as North Korean prison camps. So there's a great deal of information about these prison camps that's come out and that's become available recently. The second significant issue that I'd like to talk about, where there's been some progress, relates to the flow of information into and out of North Korea. North Korea remains one of the most isolated places on earth. North Korea is a place where it is illegal to own a radio that can be tuned. You are not allowed to have a tunable radio. You cannot buy a tunable radio in North Korea. It is preset to the government channel. Same thing is true with television sets. The government does not want information from the outside to come in. This is a country where the internet is virtually non-existent. There are a few government agencies that are allowed to have access to the internet, but internally in the country, no one has access to the internet. Despite this, there are somewhere between 20 and 30% of the North Korean population who, in interviews with people who have left North Korea, indicate that they have listened to foreign radio broadcasts. So there's a certain amount of information that's going into North Korea, and that appears to be increasing. The other thing that is interesting is that DVDs, which provide information, they provide more entertainment. And the DVDs that are most valued are South Korean soap operas. South Korea is the wave of culture in Asia right now. And South Korean DVDs are very highly prized in North Korea. And the estimates from refugees who've left North Korea indicate that some half the population have seen these DVDs, South Korean soap operas. And they provide information about what is happening, what is going on in outside, beyond the boundaries of North Korea. North Korea is also a place where it is, has until recently not been possible to have a cell phone. Cell phones have come in the last few years, and it is now possible for people in North Korea to have cell phones. There are about 1 million cell phones for 24 million people. It is not an unrestricted cell phone. In North Korea, you are allowed to have a cell phone, but you can only call other North Koreans. You cannot make foreign calls, and you cannot call foreigners who live in North Korea. It is possible for foreigners to have a cell phone, but foreigners are given a cell phone that will only work to call other foreigners. So the British ambassador has a cell phone. The British ambassador's North Korean driver has a cell phone, but the two of them can't call each other, which gives you some indication of the problem. The difference between North Korea and South Korea is indicative of the difference between North Korea and the rest of the world. In North Korea, as I say, there are about 1 million cell phones for 24 million people, 0.04 cell phones per person. In South Korea, on the other hand, there are 1.3 cell phones per person, which gives you some indication of the difference in terms of access to information. It's significant, however, because information does circulate in North Korea, and with cell phones it's circulating even faster. There are some markets that are allowed to function and to operate, and prices in the market are more readily available. You know what the price is on products from one market to another. So information is beginning to circulate in North Korea, and I think that's probably a very encouraging kind of step. I want to make a couple of comments about some of the things that we appreciate that the Canadian government has done. We have tried to work carefully and closely with the Canadian government, with other governments who are involved in dealing with North Korea, and we appreciate the cooperation and the opportunity of consulting on what we're doing and what other countries are trying to do in terms of dealing with North Korea. When I've been in Pyongyang, I have met with the Korean when I've been in Seoul, I've met with the Korean ambassador in Seoul, who is also accredited or has been accredited in the past to North Korea, and it's been useful to exchange information. I met your ambassador when I was in Seoul just a couple of weeks ago. But the Canadian government and Canadian NGOs have played an important role in terms of engaging with North Korea, and we think that has been helpful and productive. The University of British Columbia has a program right now where a handful of North Korean professors will spend 6 months in Vancouver and will be able to improve their understanding of economics and Western market economy. These are useful programs. We've had a few North Koreans who've come to the United States, none of them for that length of time. And so I commend the Canadians, particularly the NGOs and the University of British Columbia, who played an important role in terms of engagement with the North Koreans. We've appreciated being able to talk with your diplomats, being able to discuss and share information that we have on North Korea, and it's been useful and productive. We've noted that Canada has imposed very tough sanctions on the DPRK, and that's been significant. The United States, we've worked with Canada and with other countries in the United Nations in terms of imposing sanctions, and we appreciate the cooperation that we've had in terms of doing that. The Canadian government has also made a number of contributions through the World Food Program to providing humanitarian assistance to North Korea, and we appreciate that. We've recognized the value of working through the UN agencies, particularly through the World Food Program, and when we've provided aid in the past, we've worked with the World Food Program in terms of doing that. The Canadian government has also been very supportive in the United Nations of resolutions critical of North Korea's human rights record, particularly in the Third Committee of the General Assembly, where resolutions have been passed for the last, I think, 8 years. The Canadian government has been supportive and positive in terms of these resolutions critical of North Korea. There have been a number of statements that have come from the Canadian government that we've seen as being positive and helpful in terms of criticizing the North Koreans for their human rights record. A recent statement on Dr. Oh Kil-nam, a South Korean whose wife and children were left in North Korean prisons when he defected, and he's been trying for some time to get his family back. The statement that the Canadian government issued in his behalf was a very useful one and a very helpful one. So we appreciate the opportunity of working with Canada on issues relating to North Korea and to North Korean human rights issues. I think the most important consideration here is that the United States and Canada share a very strong commitment and tradition of respect for human rights, of the value and importance of pursuing these rights, and we look forward to working together with the Canadian government, with the Canadian Parliament in terms of working on these issues. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being able to talk with you today about these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We look like we'll have time for the rounds to be 5 minutes long, including answers. We begin with Mr. Sweet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your testimony, for investing the time here. You had mentioned, and we're grateful for your commendation, too, to Canada and the Government of Canada for its participation with the United States and trying to put as much pressure as we can on North Koreans so that they will capitulate and end this terrible, tragic tradition of human rights violations to a degree. When you're talking about putting hooks in people, there's not much more that we've heard more severe here. In fact, we had our own foreign affairs people brief us just recently on the dimension of the sanctions. I guess this is a very broad question, but we've seen sanctions actually make a substantial difference, although nothing has changed in the regime, but in a relatively short period of time compared to North Korea, sanctions that have really made a severe impact on Iran. And we haven't seen any results really in these sanctions other than, of course, I mean, it has done substantial damage to their economy, but we haven't seen any capitulation so far on their behalf. Is there a reason why these sanctions aren't working?
Probably the difference between the North Korean economy and the Iranian economy. North Korea is a much, much smaller, much less sophisticated economy. And the result is that the effects, I think, are less felt because there are not large amounts of foreign purchases of North Korean-produced goods or resources. North Korea has more trade and external economic relations with China than any other country, and the sanctions against North Korea have been in place for a number of years, and the result is that this is not a functioning economy, and I think it's much harder. I think the sanctions are important. I think we need to keep them in place. I think the sanctions have prevented further problems that might have developed if we hadn't had them in place. But in terms of having the impact that they've had in, such as the sanctions have had in Iran recently, it's quite different.
Yeah, we don't see people marching in the street as we have in Iran. At least there's some hopeful uprising in the grassroots there. And I take your point with the less than sophisticated economy. I guess that was demonstrated in your percentage of people that had cell phones just a few moments ago.
Thing is, in Iran, people can call out. When our radio broadcasts have been going into Iran, people inside Iran have called out and are rebroadcast. Never happens in North Korea.
Exactly, yeah. People actually make it out of Iran. Yes.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned China, one of my other questions was, could you give us an update for what you know in regards to how North Korean refugees are being treated in China right now? What's the situation in that regard?
The situation of the refugees is quite difficult. It is very difficult to get out of North Korea. The only way to get out of North Korea is across the border with China. The border with South Korea is heavily guarded and mined, and the result is that the only way out is through China. The Chinese have generally tended to return people that have been captured after they have escaped from North Korea, after they've crossed the border into China. And we have urged the Chinese to observe their obligations to allow people to leave. Refugees, when they are returned, are punished, and it's a fairly serious problem. There are reports frequently in the press of refugees being returned.
And finally, Mr. King, Kim Jong-il is gone, Kim Jong-un is now there. And do you have any intelligence that there's any room for hope in this regard?
This is a system that is set up to have one man in charge, and there's no indication that the change in leadership has changed anything in terms of the nature of the dictatorship there. Very clearly, the new leader is from a different generation. One of the things that I found interesting is that we found out that he has a wife who appeared with him in public on a number of occasions. We've never found out information like that about other North Korean leaders. Now, whether these are significant changes or whether these are simply appearance changes, we're watching carefully and hoping to see.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you. Mr. Marston, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Ambassador. Pleased to have you here. In March next year, the UN Rapporteur Special Review of the Human Rights Situation in North Korea is going to be releasing a report. Do you see that as something that will have any impact? I mean, the impression we get is that there's not a lot that actually reaches this regime in the sense of influencing it for true change. Do you think there's any hope for this?
You know, I think, as with a lot of UN mechanisms, it's cumulative, and we need to continue to press the North Koreans to deal with their human rights obligations. There have been reports issued by, we're now on the second of the special rapporteurs on North Korea human rights, and there have been a number of reports that have been issued over the years. Those reports provide useful details, useful information, documentation on the problems in North Korea. One thing that I thought was encouraging is that 3 years ago, the North Koreans participated in the Universal Periodic Review in Geneva in the Human Rights Council. The idea behind the Universal Periodic Review is that every country in the UN will come, make a presentation on its human rights record, and then hear comments from other countries. North Korea, which has, as I've said, one of the worst records, nonetheless felt that it needed to participate in that process. They came, they made a presentation, they asserted that there were no changes that they needed to make, that human rights in North Korea were all good. But in fact, there were changes that were made in their legislation. Whether in fact this translates into changes in practice is another issue. But there is an issue of legitimacy, and a country, I think, to be legitimately accepted needs to recognizes that it needs to do something on its human rights record. So I think it's helpful and useful that we continue to press on these issues. I don't think we're going to see quick dramatic change, but I think that I'm hopeful that we'll eventually see progress.
Well, it's been reported to us that you have had some thoughts about some diplomatic and policy options that could be used to pressure. Would you like to expand on that a bit? Or?
We have pressed the North Koreans. We've made clear to the North Koreans that if they want to have a normal diplomatic relationship with the United States, part of that will have to be recognition of human rights. And I think we've tried to make that point to the North Koreans on the occasions when we've been able to talk with them about these issues. I've had discussions with the North Koreans on a couple of occasions where we've talked about some of these human rights issues and the importance of doing so. We've engaged in dialogue with the Chinese government on human rights. China is certainly not as far along on its human rights record as we'd like to see.
We all feel the same.
But they've made some progress. And I'm hopeful that if we continue to press the North Koreans, we'll make progress there as well.
Well, we have to recognize when any of them move the line at all, because it's such an important issue. Do I have any time left?
You do. You have a minute and a half.
Oh, good. About 4 years ago, I was on the DMZ, and we backed up onto the line for a photo. And when we did, two of the North Korean guards come charging off the hill from here to the chair away from us, looking at us with binoculars. The thing that struck me was how fragile looking these men were. I mean, they looked like 14-year-old boys. And I thought at the time, is if this is how they feed their army, how in the world are their population even surviving? Has that improved at all?
No. North Korea does not have an economy that provides enough food for its population. The North Koreans and the South Koreans are basically the same genetic makeup. A North Korean who is 18 years old is 5 inches shorter than a South Korean the same age. And keep in mind that those soldiers you saw at the DMZ are the biggest and toughest and strongest that they have.
No comparison at all.
Yeah. No, the difference between North Korea and South Korea
is very shocking to see. It really touches you when you see it actually. Even though they're very aggressive people, it is sad to see people living in that state.
South Korea has a population twice the size of North Korea, almost 50 million as opposed to 24 million in the north. The difference in the gross domestic product of North Korea and South Korea is 20 times the size of North Korea. And this tells you something about the problems there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We turn now to Mr. Albrecht, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Your Excellency, for being with us today. Certainly, your comments about the current situation in North Korea are very, very troubling. I don't think any of us can possibly imagine what conditions must be like there. This committee, the subcommittee, prior to my being part of it, had recommended that a commission of inquiry be set up to go into North Korea. Recently, we had officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade here at our committee, and it was pointed out to us there are a number of factors that would probably not promote the idea of an inquiry being successful. First of all, what additional information would be gained in addition to what the rapporteur is collecting. We know North Korea would not grant access to a commission of inquiry. But then the third concern was that perhaps even with the UN, a request to the UN to grant such an inquiry, the other bodies there would probably use a veto power to not allow that to happen. Now, there is a report that's coming up of the Special Rapporteur that I understand is to be released in March of 2013. I'm just wondering, Mr. Ambassador, if what your expectations are, and I know it's hard to speculate, what are your expectations in terms of the utility of that report? Will it actually have any weight in terms of being able to help us move forward on addressing the issues that we're facing in North Korea?
As I mentioned, there are two special rapporteurs who have reported on North Korea under the United Nations procedures. One of them was an Indonesian law professor, Vitit Munterborn. He served for the first 4 or 5 years that there was a special rapporteur. He's been succeeded a couple of years ago by Marzuki Darusman, who is a former Indonesian government official, was, I think, Minister of Justice, and was also involved in the Human Rights Commission there. The value of the reports that these men have produced, I think, are the fact that these are independent observers who have background and stature and recognition, and they are identifying serious human rights violations in these countries. You mentioned the difficulty of their being allowed to enter North Korea. Both of them have requested permission to visit North Korea. They have been ignored or denied. They nonetheless have continued. They've met with refugees in South Korea. They've met with Japanese government officials. They've met with others in many other areas. And the credibility of the reports that they have produced, I think, are an important element in terms of calling attention to the human rights violations there. And these reports, there will be a report by the Special Rapporteur presented in March in Geneva, as you mentioned. There will also be one that will be presented next week in New York at the General Assembly from the Special Rapporteur. So I think these are important. They haven't produced dramatic change, but human rights is something that we need to continue to press on it, even though we don't get immediate positive results.
Well, on that point, I just want to say I admire your and other people's perseverance and patience in the very slow progress that's being made. If you were to outline 3 or 4 steps that the international community could take, or that Canada itself could cooperate with the U.S. and other allies, what are some key elements, in addition to some things that you've mentioned, sanctions and so on, that we could actually bring a positive change about?
I think in terms of dealing with human rights, one of the things we need to do is to make sure that on the one hand, we continue to criticize and call attention to the problems. I think we need to continue doing that. On the other hand, I think there is merit and value in engaging the North Koreans and trying to do some of the kinds of things that the University of British Columbia is doing. We need to try to give North Koreans an idea of what it's like to be in a free society like Canada. And I think this provides an opportunity for people to see what it means to have access to these human rights, and that affects what goes on in the countries.
Okay, just on that point, do you have another half a minute or so?
You do.
Okay, just on that point with the professors visiting UBC, that was new to me. I'm wondering about how comfortable the government of North Korea is in granting access to foreign countries for people of that stature. Are there not fears of defections and so on, or what's the track record on that?
It's important for North Koreans to have some sense of how the world works. If North Korea is going to improve its economy, and they indicate that they want to improve the economy, if they're going to attract foreign investment, they need to have people who understand Western economies and understand Western business practices. So I think it's valuable and useful from the point of view of the government to see those kind of things.
But understanding the restrictions on information flowing in and out, I'm surprised that. So is there no restriction on people coming from North Korea to other countries for exchange purposes or whatever?
There are limits on people that are allowed to leave North Korea. You have to have permission to leave North Korea. Only certain people are allowed to go. There's usually an effort to have someone to keep an eye on.
Right.
On,
so they're
you never
closely
meet
monitored.
with a North Korean alone. You always meet with two North Koreans, and they report on you. But I think that's part of the process in terms of how that works. But I think it's worth doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. We move now to Madame Saint-Denis, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je vais revenir sur.
I'm going to come back to the results of the various programs. You say that Canada should continue with these programs, but are there reports as to how North Koreans react to their coming here to Canada? Because we of the Western world would say, well, they want to come to see what we're doing. That's good. But were you to think, for example, to the Hasidic community in Montreal that lives right in the center of the city, that see everything that's happening around them, and that is not able, that you cannot breach the wall that surrounds them. So one wonders, do North Koreans react positively? Are they tempted to leave the country, or are they completely waterproof to anything happening?
We have some experience with the former Soviet Union. And there were a number of occasions when Soviet citizens came to the United States to study. The effect was dramatic in terms of changing their view of the world. They went back, all of them went back to the Soviet Union, but it turned out, and some of them went back to work for the KGB, but they all had a different view of the United States because they had been in the United States studying. And over time, we have seen what has happened to those people, particularly since the Soviet Union disappeared in 1991, and the effect of these people having some sense, some idea of what was going on outside was extremely useful, extremely important. I think it's important that we do this. Another example, one of the people who came to the United States to visit the United States, spend some time looking at different parts of our country, was the former president of South Africa, the last white president of South Africa. And as a young man, he came to the United States where race relations were very different than what they were in South Africa. And I'd like to think that the effect of seeing what happens in the United States, and our record on race relations is certainly not without its flaws, Nonetheless, he went back to South Africa with a different view of the world. And I don't think that people who come to Canada or come to the United States from a country like North Korea are going to go back and not be affected by what they see.
Okay, j'ai le temps d'une autre deuxième question.
Do I have time for a second question? Okay. On another, the increase in tension between China and Japan, is this undermining the multilateral efforts with a view of having an agreement on the nuclear arms in North Korea? And if so, how, with respect to human rights, what would be the international approach with respect to the U.S.'s commitment versus North Korea?
The territorial differences are very complicated, but it's extremely important in terms of what we have been doing with North Korea to work together with other countries. The principal countries that have been involved are the so-called six parties, North Korea and South Korea, as well as the United States, China, Japan. And these six countries sort of represent the countries with the strongest interest in stability in Northeast Asia. But other countries can and have played an important role in terms of helping diffuse situations in that part of the world. And I think Canada is one of the countries that can play a role, and it would be helpful to have Canada playing a role in that process.
Okay. Je peux en avoir une autre?
Have another one? Just one. Very short. Given the violations of human rights in Korea, what would be the position of the government, of the American government, when there's a view of finding out whether or not the international community should assume a little bit of responsibility? The interpreter didn't get the last part. Whether or not the international community should call upon the doctrine of the responsibility to protect.
Responsibility to protect is it's something that in international law we've tried to use, but it has to be used delicately when other sovereign states have interests at stake. The responsibility to protect in North Korea is important, but how far we go and what we can do is significant as well. These are countries where North and South Korea have come to blows on occasion, and we need to deal with human rights in a way that doesn't create provocations on either side that will cause difficulties. And I think it's an issue that we have to work with, and we have to work with carefully with other countries and through the United Nations.
Okay. Mrs. Graywall, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. King, thank you very much for traveling to Ottawa and meeting with our committee to discuss our shared deep concerns about the human rights situation in North Korea. It is also really very troubling. In North Korea, we have an authoritarian state with a government that denies freedom of speech and press, assembly, association, religion, and movement, and whatnot. So we have reports of extrajudicial killings and disappearances, arbitrary detention, and torture. You have really traveled the globe extensively, meeting with government officials and legislators around the globe. So is there any consensus on how we can really move forward and successfully tackle human rights situation and abuses in DPRK?
Human rights is something that one continues to work on without making dramatic breakthroughs in most cases. I remember very well trying to deal with human rights issues involving the former Soviet Union in the 1960s and 1970s. The progress that we made in terms of refuseniks being allowed to leave the Soviet Union were difficult. I can remember the American Congress meeting with the wives of some of these refuseniks who were imprisoned in the Soviet Union. The main thing I think we need to do is make sure that we do not abandon our commitment to human rights. We need to continue to press on these issues. We need to continue to keep them in the forefront, and eventually we'll begin to make progress. I see the way things have happened in Russia. We're still not at the point that we'd like to be in terms of human rights there, but we've made great progress from where we were in an earlier era. The same thing is true in China. The same thing is true in many other places. We still have a much greater distance to go in the case of North Korea, but I think we need to continue to press, to continue to keep this in the forefront.
I see. NGOs, refugees and press reports indicate that there are a vast network forced labor camps in North Korea. So I understand that you had the opportunity to visit there last year, to travel to Pyongyang to meet with the North Korean officials. So did you have an opportunity during this visit to bring up the issues of these camps?
The primary purpose for my going to North Korea was to talk about the possibility of the United States providing humanitarian assistance. As I mentioned, North Korea is a country that isn't able to grow enough food to feed its population. The United States has a policy of basing assistance, humanitarian assistance, on need and not on politics. And one of my purposes in going to North Korea was to be able to conduct an assessment of the need in North Korea. A second concern and consideration for the United States is that when we provide humanitarian assistance, we want to be able to be assured that the aid we provide will get to those who are most in need. And my discussions with the North Koreans were primarily focused on those issues. We were able to reach some agreements that we thought were helpful. We were able to conduct an assessment that we thought was productive. We ran into difficulties when the North Koreans abrogated agreements that they had reached with us in other areas, and we didn't have the assurance that we felt we needed, that we would be able to see that the aid was delivered to where it was needed, and we ultimately ended up suspending the aid. But we were able to have good discussions with the North Koreans on providing humanitarian assistance. We were able to begin some discussions on human rights issues that I thought were useful and productive. The relationship has suffered a little bit since then. We haven't been able to continue in some of those areas, but I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that sometime.
The last question, Ms. Greer, while you're out of time.
In your opinion...
sorry, that has to be the last question. You're out of time. Monsieur Jacob, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Your Excellency, for having come this afternoon. My first question has to do with the fact you gave us, and rightly so, unfortunately, a very bleak picture of human rights in North Korea. In your opinion, what is at stake with respect to human rights that are and should be the most pressing and the great priority at the moment?
It is hard to identify a particular human right that's more important than others. On the other hand, it seems to me that when we've got to prioritize, freedom of information is one of the most important, because it's only when people have information that they're able to understand what the issues are in other parts of the world, that they're able to understand how others have resolved these issues. So I would probably suggest that we need to put a focus on freedom of information, increasing information flow, but continue to work on other issues, rule of law, juridical procedures, these kind of things.
Merci.
Thank you. My second question. You say that you went to North Korea, and you say that there are professors, there's an exchange program between BC and professors. Are there observers? I mean, is this a bilateral exchange program? Are there observers that go to North Korea to see really what's going on in that country?
Difficult country to visit, but there are tours that are offered. Some people go and they will actually have an opportunity to visit North Korea as a tourist. There are other groups that visit, a number of NGOs. There are American NGOs, there are Canadian NGOs that provide humanitarian assistance, who visit North Korea, who are allowed to visit hospitals and medical facilities where they provide assistance and advice. There is a very interesting university called the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, PUST, which is an organization that's funded largely by Korean, South Korean, Korean American, and other groups that provides instruction in science and technology and business in English. The faculty is largely composed of people who volunteer, they're primarily Christian groups that are involved in this. And there are people who go and instruct in mathematics and in science and in business topics. And they are one of the universities in North Korea that functions in North Korea. The student body is selected by the North Korean government, but all of the instruction is in English, and the teachers that are there are teaching them topics that you teach in a Canadian or in an American university. So there is some effort in terms of people going into North Korea, and I think these are all positive. It's seen by North Koreans as being positive because they need information in these areas.
Merci, il me reste un peu de temps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I have a little bit of time? Yes, 1 minute. Go ahead. My last question would be how the initiatives taken by Canada with respect to human rights in North Korea might be useful within a coordinated international strategy. And to your mind, could Canada take some measures, some specific measures in this regard?
Can play an important role in this. As I mentioned, I think Canada and the United States and other democratic countries share a common set of values. And I think this common sense of priority for human rights and democracy and so forth is important. And I think it helps if we coordinate and cooperate and work together. One of the things that I have tried to do in my position is to meet periodically with representatives of the other governments who share these same values that we share and talk about what we're doing and talk about and learn what other countries are doing. And so I think it's useful for us to do this. We've had meetings in Brussels primarily focused on the European Union, but there were Canadian representatives that had participated in that session. I think that it's helpful because other countries, many countries have special skills or NGOs that have special experiences, and I think it helps. The Mennonite Central Committee, for example, is an NGO which functions both in the United States and in Canada. It is the Canadian arm of the Mennonite Central Committee which is taken the lead in dealing with North Korea. It's easier for the Canadians to deal with North Korea than for the Americans, for obvious reasons. And so I think there are cases like this where there are many areas that we can work together and where cooperation enhances what we can do individually.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Jacob. With the indulgence of the committee...
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
With the indulgence...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would like to see the clock is not yet being at 2 and allow Mr. De Vollen one question. Would that be acceptable?
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Thanks for being here, Ambassador. For those of us who would like to see an improvement in the quality of life and the human rights of the people of North Korea in the near future, not after regime change, but in the near future, do you think we'd be better off to spend our time and effort trying to influence the Chinese, who obviously directly deal with North Korean refugees who cross into China, but as well to try to persuade the Chinese to have an influence on the North Koreans? I'm presuming that the Chinese might be the only people that the North Koreans listen to. So the question is, would we be better off spending our time trying to persuade the Chinese to get things done rather than us trying to persuade the North Korean regime directly?
I would argue, as an American president said, you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. I would suggest that we can do both. We need to press the Chinese. We need to urge the Chinese to allow refugees who want to leave North Korea to leave. We need to urge the Chinese to press the North Koreans to make progress on human rights issues. But at the same time, I think we need to continue to work with the North Koreans as well. So I'd say we need to do both, and we ought to try to do both. We have pressed the Chinese on many of these issues. We continue to urge Chinese cooperation on these human rights issues. We continue to press the North Koreans on them as well. And the Canadian influence would be useful to have on both fronts.
Anything else?
No, is there any evidence that having a positive influence or trying to have an influence on China has borne any fruit? Can you point to anything any success that we've ever had in that regard?
With human rights, we're looking at long term. I think we've made progress with China. Our relationship with China today, China's involvement in the international community today is much more positive than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think with all of these things, it's an ongoing struggle, and I think we need to continue that effort. I think, yes, I think there's progress. There's been progress in China, and I think as we continue to press the Chinese on North Korea, there will be progress there. I don't think that the Chinese have a great deal of influence with North Koreans. I think they have more influence than we do, but I think we need to continue to urge the Chinese and the North Koreans to make progress.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. We are very appreciative you were able to take the time and for the quality of what you presented to us. I think this will be very, very useful to us going forward. So with that, I just ask the members of the committee to rest. Again, with further indulgence, I want to discuss that matter regarding Monday's meeting and potential change of subject matter, but I think we should do that in camera. So let's dismiss with our thanks, our witness, and suspend momentarily to go in camera. We should be done in just 2 or 3 minutes once we've done so.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.